Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good dark topic, let's do it. What's the most morally disgusting thing you've ever seen someone do? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Once worked with a guy that was HIV positive, and he would purposely date underage boys and not tell them. Luckily, he was arrested one day at work. My brother stole nearly $10,000 from my parents' checking account to buy heroin while my dad was in the hospital having a stroke and we thought he might die. My dad wrote him out of his will after this. My neighbor's 2 sons got addicted to heroin. They stole pretty much everything they could from him to sell for drug money, then resorted to shoplifting and stealing from others. They broke into our house and stole a bunch of stuff, but they made the mistake of doing it when my husband was out walking our dog, who had for once in his life done his business quickly and wanted to go back home right afterwards. So my husband and the dog interrupted them and they got caught. They've been in and out of jail since then. I haven't seen them in a couple of years though, and our neighbor doesn't talk about them. It took years before he'd look us in the eye again after they broke into our house. He only recently started waving and saying hello again. We didn't hold any of it against him. He'd tried to put them into rehab, had gotten them clean a few times, but they always fell back into it. Worked in animal rescue welfare and encountered so many people who just had zero regard for other beings. Lots of mutilation, things like people taking their kitchen scissors to their cat's ears and paw pads, giving their dogs body piercings and tattoos, literally just cutting chunks out of their pets for no reason other than to see how far they could go. Hoarding cases are awful, but it's truly a mental illness, and hoarders believe they are helping. Backyard breeders are unethical in creating sick Frankendogs, but the mutilation really sticks in my brain, because there's no explanation for it that could even pretend to pass as logical or humane. I work in a nursing home. I'd been body mapping an old lady and noticing a lot of bruises popping up with some frequency. I paid close attention to her for a while, and one day I saw this new agency guy from Nigeria lift her arm whilst she was walking and slapped the shit out of it. Never shouted at someone so effing loud before. Reported him immediately, and the bastard denied everything. No other witnesses but me. He got away with it. One time when I was just a kid, maybe 10 at the oldest, was walking to a friend's house. A dark-haired teenage girl, probably 16 or 17, was walking about 20 paces ahead of me. Along the way, she met up with a blonde teenage girl. They appeared to be friends as they walked along talking to each other. Suddenly, a car pulled up, and the blonde girl shoved the other girl to the ground and kicked her right in the face. Then she got in the car and they sped off. The dark-haired girl just lay on the ground crying. I froze in place, not knowing what to do. After a few minutes, a guy on a motor scooter showed up and helped the girl up, and she got on the back of his scooter and they left. I've probably seen worse things in my life because of what I do for a living, but I'm now 47, and this has stuck with me my whole life. A man posting pictures of his ex-wife and her, not his, adult daughter on dating sites using fake profiles, saying they're looking for threesomes and stuff with their actual address and real phone numbers. Constantly posts on local boards where she lives calling her a slut, homewrecker, etc. This is ongoing now, 2 years after she divorced him. He was the one with the girlfriend on the side. He lives with the girlfriend now and is still doing this to his ex-wife. I feel bad for everyone involved. I work in animal rescue. I hate people most days. The abuse to animals is sickening. I can't tell you how many times I've heard it's just a dog or a bird or a horse. I have a cockatoo that spent 3 years in a cage in a closet under a blanket because she was too loud. I have a dog who is terrified of boots because a man kicked her constantly. I rescued a cat who was tortured by neighborhood kids. They had duct-taped firecrackers to her tail, then closed her up in a box and tossed her in the middle of the street to watch the box explode. People are cruel. Had a friend who was manipulated by someone who entered our friend group. He had gotten an inheritance from when his father passed away and was told to use it on his education. He ended up moving in with the manipulator, and within no time at all, the guy convinced him that he could triple that inheritance through selling drugs. that he would make his money back by the time his tuition was due. Thing is, the guy convinced him to spend the whole inheritance, leaving him no money for rent, no money for anything. Took the drugs, ran off to Maryland, changed his phone number. We tried telling him this was a bad idea, but in our friend's eyes, this guy was the coolest or some shit. Yes, I know this can be chalked up to stupidity, but our buddy had lost his mom at a young age. His father passed away before he turned 19. His stepmom tried to keep everything, kept most of it, changed the locks to the house his father had built. He was going through a lot of crap at the time and was easily manipulated. Not as bad as some other stuff here, but a friend of a family member called an ambulance for their friend who was actively dying of cancer to get her out of her house, just so her and her daughter could raid the place of all the valuables. This included her cancer pain meds, that which they sold. A doctor during the CDC opioid panic with the new guidelines decided to cut an elderly man's prescription. He had a whole plethora of really effed up illnesses, including AS and DDD. His spine was completely fused. He was on a lot, not sure of the exact numbers, but over 300 milligrams. The doctor cut his script in half and rapid tapered him, saying he needs to find other ways to deal with his pain. He tried going with it, went into withdrawal, and became essentially bedbound and in constant pain. No amount of calls or pleas from him and his family would do anything. His son showed up with a video of him screaming until he passed out, and the doctor kicked him out. His 75-year-old wife was planning on buying him heroin, but he took his own life before that happened. F that piece of shit doctor. Literally tortured him to death. I didn't mean to make, well, I clearly did mean to make the comment, but how do scammers sleep at night? I think pretty well. To get into that business, you probably are very morally compromised, and it doesn't get better, so they're the worst. I just can't get over the mind of scammers. How do they sleep at night? Don't they feel terrible guilt tricking people out of their hard-earned money and ruining their lives? They don't. A coworker with AIDS being proud of infecting many people. According to him, he did it as a revenge plot because he was not sure who infected him. Damn asshole. Groomed his African sponsor child he and his wife put through school and university. She called them Mom and Dad. They brought her out to our country a few times and visited her in Kenya. They admitted the affair, then fled the state to avoid the scandal, as he was a pretty high-standing doctor in one of the biggest hospitals here. They are married with a kid now. Ex-wife didn't throw him under the bus, reputation-wise, but his former stepkids might. What? When I was 15, one of the dogs at my mom's place started acting strangely. Cowered in corners, not eating, generally appearing sick, and to some extent dying. My mother started to examine the dog, and she found a pustule in his ass. Instead of taking our sweet dog to the vet, she decided that she had the experience to make our dog better. Every night for 2 weeks, she would constrict the dog, heat up a needle, and poke a hole in the pustulate. She'd squeeze out the yuck that was inside while the dog whined and cried. 2 weeks, every night in completely non-sterile environment. Finally, my stepdad said enough, and they took him to the vet. Turned out his anal glands were inflamed, and had been for years. Also why the dog kept chasing his tail. We all thought he was just doing a dog thing. They had to remove the anal glands, but also told us it wouldn't have been necessary had my mother not intervened. I still think about the suffering my mother put him through. My mother never appeared morally compromised, not before and not after. In her head, she had just tried to help, while making it worse and torturing the poor dog. But I also remember her saying that vets are expensive, and I think that had a large part in it as well. Moral of the story: don't have pets if you can't afford to take them to the vet, and don't ever think you can fix it yourself. You'll end up putting your pets through so much suffering. My mom used to routinely register my Down syndrome sister to vote by mail, and then vote twice for all the conservative right-wing candidates. When I was finally at the age to understand what she was doing, I called her out on it, and she responded that she was doing what she had to do for God. As a kid, I took a job selling windows and siding, and an old lady called the ad about windows and siding because she wanted storm windows on her home. The salesman and I went out, and she was about 90 years old, but wanted storm windows. He sold her new windows, which meant rather than placing storm panes over her current windows, they would be ripping out the old and installing double insulated new. He financed this monstrosity of a project and got her to sign on the dotted line. I left the job the minute I got back to the office. Morally disgusting. Was at like a cheap food store. Young couple with a baby were buying groceries and stuff to get by on. Went to pay for their things and didn't have enough to cover everything. She started to cry because she couldn't pay for her pamperine and pads. Turns out they had moved out of town for a job, and he was 3 weeks away from his first paycheck and were living in their car. A well-known higher society lady behind me in line was scolding the young couple about if you couldn't afford, they shouldn't have put it in the cart. She was loud and nasty about it. This is the same woman who was a pillar of our community and a standout for the Mormon church. I don't usually puff up often, but I told her to shut her mouth, then paid for all their stuff, and even gave them my address so they could shower or warm up or whatever. They were very adamant about staying in their car. I've seen other stuff, but this one really bothered me and does to this day. Got put on a troubled project in a temporary director role. They brought in another guy, let's call him Snake, just below my level to help. We sat in a conference room for 3 weeks and together came up with a plan to salvage the project. Project finished on time, client was very happy, and the product was well received. Went to see the exec a week later. He had already met with Snake, who told him that he did all the work and I did nothing. I asked the exec what he thought I was doing for 3 weeks in the room with Snake, and he just shrugged. The exec was very surprised when I quit to go work down the street at another studio as a full-time director, where I met another slimeball, but that story is out of scope for OP's question. My ex, 25 years ago, started a relationship of sorts with a young lady who was quite unhinged. She was obsessed with me for some reason and would do really weird stuff and then blame it on me. I had never met or even seen this girl. I got all this secondhand from a mutual. One day she showed up at my friend's house. We have no idea how she found us or even that I was there with her baby to fight me. We were incredulous. That ended with the cops being called because she had a gun. Well, he confronted her about it and ended things with her, telling her that taking her child to fight was dumb AF and he was done with her. She proceeded to take her 6-month-old daughter and throw her out of the house. She yeeted her effing baby over the porch. They had been in a deck on the front of their house, and the baby could have heard my friend describing the fight that ensued when she threw the effing baby. By the way, the baby was somehow almost completely fine, although I figured the baby had to be severely hurt, 1 broken rib and a bunch of bruises. Mom went to the hospital before jail, unrecognizable. My brother spent most of my mom's savings while he was taking care of her. She finally had to go to a nursing home and he picked out a horrible cheap one. We got her moved to a better place, and after a few weeks, when my mom passed, my brother knew that there was no money left and tried to pick out a wicker basket for her and limit the viewing to 1 2-hour session, just so morally reprehensible that none of us have maintained contact with him. A friend had told me that his great-grandma was dying of breast cancer, and it was collectively decided by the entire family to let her daughter, his aunt, be in charge of her assets, retirement money, savings, etc., to take care of her needs, only for the daughter end to the start and stealing money slowly and not providing her basic needs. The family only found out what was going on with his great-grandma begged his older cousin about sending her some money for food and toiletries. When his aunt found out, she told him she started abusing him with a great-grandma and made it worse. All hell broke loose within the family, apparently. Unfortunately, I was the one who did the morally disgusting thing. I worked for a rideshare company and had a passenger I was picking up from the hospital. Passenger is brought out in a wheelchair and needs a nurse to help him in. He doesn't speak any English, and I know very little Spanish, so communication is difficult. The hospital was paying for the trip, and I was taking him to a homeless shelter. When I got there, places are locked up and has a number to call for service. I call and they tell me that the hospital didn't call us ahead of time, so we won't take them. I call the hospital and say, "Oh yeah, the shelter away says that. Just drop him off in the front of the shelter and they'll eventually bring him in." To this day, I'm ashamed that I had to help this feeble old man with little to no understanding of what's going on out of my car and just sat him on a bench next to the shelter.